All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about editing guitars. So ideally, you would have recorded multiple takes, make sure that you got the best performance, either re-recording parts that you needed to correct or comping pieces from different takes so that you have one final track that you're happy with. But sometimes you might just need to edit those guitars a little bit more to get it to that next level. So let's dive right in. So the first thing I want to talk about is the different types of edits that you can make to an audio item or a media item. There's the split command or the cut or the break. I've set the split action to the S key on my keyboard. In other DAWs, it might be the C key or the X key. Then there's also adjusting the beginning and ending of the items. And in some DAWs, you have to select this tool. You can hover to the edge of an item and then you can click and drag. There's also drawing and fade, so a lot of DAWs have the capability by going to the upper corner, clicking and dragging. Or in many DAWs, there's a shortcut like F or Control F or Command F. There's also a crossfade, so instead of just doing a single fade, if you're between two items, you can often add a crossfade. And this is the equivalent of a fade out of the previous item and a fade in of the next item, so it works a little more seamlessly than if you just faded one or the other. So I'm going to listen to the first guitar track along with the drums to see if anything is a little bit out of time, and then we'll make the adjustments necessary to bring it back in time. I know I sped up a little bit while I was playing with the riff, so let's try to correct that with some edits. So you can see that this note right here is a little bit early, and then all of these other notes are a little bit late when you're looking at the grid lines. Now we don't want anything to be exactly on the grid because that takes away some of the humanistic feel of the rhythm, but we do want to get relatively close. Let's zoom into the waveform. You want to be looking at where the note starts, then you want to look at the transient that comes shortly after the note begins. This is what you want to be lined up with the grid. There's a number of ways to do this. The first thing that I would do is I would split the item. So in Reaper, that's S, or in other DAWs, it's cut. So you can use C or X, depending on the shortcut. So I'll split the item here. Now, before you make any changes to one note, you want to make sure that you split before the next note. Otherwise, you're going to be moving the entire track as you adjust. Okay, so I put a split here as well. Now, you could just pull this note to the grid, but then that leaves this gap here, which is almost always audible. So take a listen. Let's take off the metronome and the drums just to listen to that. So it's almost a choppiness that comes in. Also, because we snap the beginning of the note to the grid, it's actually going to sound a little bit late because that transient isn't on that grid. So let's use some fine tuning. I'm going to hold the command key and drag because that's what I have my mouse modifier set to. And I'm going to bring it back to where the first big transient hits right onto the grid. Okay, and this is going to make sure that that transient is nice and in time, and that already solves part of our gap problem. And then I'll drag this edge back so that it meets the previous media item. All right, and adjust the fades as necessary. Okay, or I could put in a crossfade. And then now when we listen to that back, we should hear that note triggering on time with a seamless transition. Okay, so that's one solution. Now the next notes in the guitar are a little behind the grid. So if we play this back with the metronome. So we can follow a very similar process here. So we've already split before the first note. And then let's find the remaining notes that are behind. So this note's behind, these notes are behind, and this one is actually easy to see with the transient that it's way behind the grid line. Okay, but then we come back relatively close to the grid here. So what I'm going to do is split right around here. Okay, and then I'm going to drag these notes closer to the grid line. And I'll work with this transient since it's more visible. All right, and we'll drag the tail end of the previous media clip back. And because these are 30-second notes that we're playing, this will help us see and make sure that these notes are in line with the grid. Let's take a listen here. Okay, so that sounds pretty good. And now we need to do the same thing here with closing the gap so that we don't have any audible silence. So again, I'm going to pull back this way and then I'll adjust the fades or again put in a crossfade because every split that you make should have a crossfade. And let's take a listen to that back with the drums. Okay, now other things that we can do. If we have multiple guitar takes, there's a process called comping where you take the best pieces of each take. It's used a lot in vocals, but it can also be used if you have a bad note played from the guitar. And I'll bring this guitar in. So let's say that we played the wrong note here. We can split it right before the transient, and then you want to make sure you capture the entire note. So we'll bring it all the way out to the tail end of the note, and then right before that next transient plays, and split there. So this is the note we want to replace, and then we want to split the note from our other take right before the transient and right before the next transient, or right at the tail end of this note. And then we can drag this right into place and make fine adjustments so that it plays right with the transient. And then we can adjust our tail to fill any gaps and then put in a fade. And then we can adjust the head of the note and adjust the fade so that we could have a seamless transition. Okay, so let's take a listen. Okay, now this is an obvious issue right here. All right, we'll split this note here, and then the next note is somewhere right around here. So we'll split here. And then the last note, somewhere around here. And you can zoom in further. And then we're also going to split before the next note so that any adjustments made to this last note don't affect the next media item. All right, now let's try to bring these on the grid. So this one's relatively on the grid, but this one is played too quickly. So we'll bring it back, and then we'll fill it out here. Adjust the fades. All right, this one is way too far in front of the grid, so we'll pull this back. Bring it this way, adjust the fades. Okay, and one thing that I want to show you is in Preferences, Command, Comma, or Control, Comma, under Editing Behavior, Mouse Modifiers, in the Media item, left drag, I've set Shift to move item contents. So instead of moving the actual media item itself, like so, we can move the contents within the media item, so just the note while the media item stays in place. And I've set that by holding the Shift key as I click and drag. So you can see that the audio inside this media item is moving, but the media item itself is staying in place. And that's a useful feature because in situations over here like this, I don't want to bring this media item this way because it's going to ruin the transient of the beginning of the next note. And I don't want to bring it to the left because it's going to cut off the end of the previous note. So what I can do to line this note up is I can hold that Shift key and click and drag to the right. And then it pulls the beginning of the note to the grid line, and then this note is going to be played in its entirety. Okay, now let's listen to that back with the instruments. Previously it sounded something like this. So a little sped up, and now it sounds right in line with the rest of the instruments. And then ultimately what I do is I go down through the entire track and make sure everything lines up nicely with the rest of the instruments and that it's all in time with the metronome. Again, not snapping every single note to the grid because that's going to get rid of the realistic feel. And every edit that you make introduces the possibility of having some kind of artifacts in the sound that could be audible. No take is perfect, but trying to get the best takes that you can in the recording process. And I would always go with comping multiple takes into one solid take and using editing as that last resort to correct that one note that might be slightly out of time or replace that one note that might be slightly out of tune. So I hope this helped you out with editing your guitars. You can apply the same concepts to vocals. If you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below, and I hope to see you in the next video.